Hey, everybody. You guys sent in some stuff about credit unions and bankruptcy, and
Uh,
we're going to jump into this chapter today from the complete book on bankruptcy. It's by Peter Francis Geraci himself.
oh, wow.
It's pretty interesting stuff, and
Mm.
we often think about banks when it comes to bankruptcy. But credit unions have their own little quirks.
Yeah, they
It
do.
seems like they could be a bit more, shall we say, involved in the whole process.
Absolutely. Before we get into it, though, just a quick note that this is all for educational purposes, and you should always consult with an attorney for legal advice.
Gotcha. So what makes credit unions so different from banks, especially when we're talking about bankruptcy?
Well, the biggest difference is that they're member-owned, unlike banks.
Hmm.
And because of that member ownership model, they can have stricter repayment policies, like requiring monthly payments that are 20% higher than a traditional bank.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt. And the chapter also mentions something about payroll deductions.
Oh, yeah, those credit unions often deduct loan payments directly from your paycheck, which can really limit your flexibility when it comes to managing your money.
Right. And isn't there something about co-signers too?
Absolutely. They're big fans of cosigners. So if you default on a loan, your friend or family member who co-signed with you could end up being responsible.
Yikes. So it's not just your own finances on the line here.
Right.
It seems like you really need to be careful when you're dealing with credit unions.
You do.
Now, the chapter also mentioned something about credit unions making claims on savings and pensions. Is that even legal?
Well, that's where things can get a little complicated, you see.
Okay.
Some credit unions might try to claim your savings or even retirement funds.
Really?
Sometimes they're legally allowed to, and sometimes they're not. It all comes down to the fine print in your loan agreement.
Oh boy, that sounds pretty scary.
It can be.
So it sounds like it's super important to have a lawyer look over everything
Yeah,
before you make any big decisions.
absolutely. An attorney can help you understand all the details and point out any red flags.
So let's say things have gotten really tough and someone is actually thinking about bankruptcy. What happens to those credit union loans?
Good question.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's say they just can't keep up with those high monthly payments and decide to stop paying their credit union loans altogether. What could happen then?
Well, one possibility is that you could be banned from using the credit union in the future.
Oh, no.
Some of them have policies that say if you discharge your debts through bankruptcy, you're no longer welcome.
Wow, so it's like a financial black mark against you?
I mean, it's not quite that extreme, but some credit unions take it very seriously. And then there's this thing called cross-collateralization.
Cross-collateralization.
Oh, okay.
That sounds ominous. What is that exactly?
Well, imagine you're trying to escape from a room, and every time you unlock one door, another one pops open.
Oh, boy.
That's kind of what cross-collateralization can feel like. You might think you're getting rid of your credit card debt in bankruptcy.
But
If you also have a car loan with the same credit union, they could force you to pay off both debts just to keep your car.
so they can basically hold your car hostage, even if you file bankruptcy on the credit card debt. That's wild.
It can be.
This is why this chapter is so important. It's a whole different set of rules when we're talking about credit unions.
It is.
Now, the chapter does debunk one common myth about credit unions. A lot of people are afraid that filing for bankruptcy with a credit union loan will get them fired from their jobs.
Oh, yeah, that's a common one.
Like their employer has some control over the credit union
Yeah.
and could retaliate.
Right. It's a misconception, though. In most cases, employers have no say in the credit union's decisions.
Oh, that's good.
So you can rest assured that filing for bankruptcy won't put your job at risk.
That's a relief. But what about those claims on pensions and retirement funds? Can they really dip into that stuff?
This is where things get really complex. You see, federal law does protect a lot of retirement accounts, but if a credit union has a valid legal claim on your pension, they might try to collect.
So it's not a sure thing, but it's not impossible either.
Right.
It sounds like having a lawyer involved from the very beginning is crucial.
Absolutely. A good lawyer can review the details and help you understand all of your options.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of potential risks. But what about solutions?
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that people can do to deal with credit union debt strategically?
That's a great question. And luckily, this chapter from Peter Francis Geraci's book has some real-world examples
Okay, great.
that can help us figure that out. Let's start with the story of Mabel.
Okay.
She owes $4,500 to her credit union, and they're holding $550 of her savings as collateral.
Oh my gosh.
And to make matters worse, she has 3 co-signers on the loan.
Wow, she's in a tough spot.
Hmm.
What does Geraci Law recommend in a case like this?
Well, Mabel could file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which would wipe out her personal liability for the loan.
Okay.
However, to protect her co-signers, she might choose to voluntarily continue making those payroll deductions.
So even though she's legally off the hook, she'd keep paying to protect the people who helped her out.
Exactly. It's a way of prioritizing those relationships even while going through bankruptcy.
That's pretty admirable.
Mm.
Now, what about the other example from the chapter?
Well, let's talk about Jean.
Okay.
She owes $5,000 to the same credit union, but she doesn't have any savings there and no co-signers on the loan.
So a little less complicated.
Yeah.
What would be the best strategy for her?
Well, Jean could also file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy to get rid of her responsibility for the loan.
Hmm.
And since there are no co-signers, she wouldn't have to worry about anyone else being held liable.
Makes sense.
She could simply notify the credit union to stop those payroll deductions and move on with a lighter financial burden.
So it sounds like Chapter 7 bankruptcy can be a pretty powerful tool in these situations.
It can be, but it's not the only option. We'll talk more about Chapter 13 and how it works with credit unions a little later.
Sounds good. I'm really starting to see how important it is to understand all of this stuff about credit unions, especially when it comes to bankruptcy.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as it seems.
You got that right, and that's why having expert guidance from someone like Geraci Law is so valuable.
Well said. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Okay, so we're back, and it's interesting, we've been talking about how credit unions can sometimes be a bit tougher than banks when it comes to bankruptcy.
Yeah, it is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
You'd think an institution that's all about community and helping its members would be a little more understanding when people are struggling financially.
Right, you would think so, but at the end of the day, they are running a business.
True.
They have to balance their responsibility to their members with protecting their own bottom line.
That's a good point, but it still doesn't make it any easier for someone who's going through bankruptcy.
Definitely not. And that's why this information from Peter Francis Geraci's book is so helpful. It gives you the knowledge you need to navigate these tricky situations.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So for our listeners out there, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned so far.
Okay, so the main thing is that credit unions are just different from banks.
Yeah.
And those differences can really matter if you're thinking about filing for bankruptcy.
We talked about those higher monthly payments, the payroll deductions, the whole cosigner thing, and even those potential claims on savings and pensions.
I'd like to keep track of.
It really is. And it seems like having an attorney on your side is super important.
Absolutely. An experienced bankruptcy attorney, like ones at Geraci Law, can look at your individual situation and explain your options in a way that makes sense.
Okay, so we've also mentioned both Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
How do those work when it comes to credit union debt?
So Chapter 7 can wipe out certain debts completely, while Chapter 13 sets up a more structured repayment plan. That can be a better choice if you have co-signers or if you want to try and consolidate your payments.
So it's about picking the right strategy for your specific needs.
Exactly. There's no one right answer for everyone. It depends on your circumstances and what you're hoping to achieve.
And this is where that idea of making a business decision, not an emotional one, really comes into play.
Yes, definitely. It's so easy to let your emotions take over when you're dealing with financial stress.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when you have that personal connection with your credit union.
You feel like you're letting them down.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, you have to put your own financial well-being first.
You have to make the best choice for your future, even if it's a hard one.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Now, remember those real-life examples we talked about from the chapter, the stories of Mabel and Jean?
Yeah.
I think they were really helpful in showing how these different approaches to credit union debt can actually work in practice.
Absolutely.
Let's revisit those cases real quick because I think they offer some great insights for anyone who's listening.
Okay, so Mabel's story highlighted how important it is to think about your co-signers, even if you're filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
Right? She chose to keep making those payments even though she didn't legally have to, just to protect the people who had helped her out.
It's a great example of how you can prioritize your relationships even while going through something as difficult as bankruptcy.
It is. And then there's Jean, who went with Chapter 7 to get rid of her credit union debt entirely.
Right. She didn't have any co-signers, so she was able to make a clean break.
It's really interesting to see how these different strategies can play out.
It really is, and it just underscores the importance of getting personalized advice from a qualified bankruptcy attorney.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our conversation, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners when it comes to credit unions and bankruptcy?
The most important thing to remember is this: don't let that feeling of loyalty to your credit union stop you from making the best financial decision for yourself.
It's easy to get caught up in that we're all a family mentality.
It is.
But their policies can really make things harder for you if you end up having to file for bankruptcy.
So be informed. Know what you're getting into and stand up for your own interests.
Well said. Knowledge is power. And the more you know about your options, the better equipped you'll be to make the best decisions for your financial future. All right, so we're back. And man, we've really learned a lot about this whole credit union thing.
We have. It's a whole different world.
It is. And it's not always a happy world either.
No, not when it comes to bankruptcy.
We've seen how their policies can really make things tough with those high payments, the cosigner requirements, even those claims on savings accounts.
It's definitely not something to take lightly.
So this information from Peter Francis Geraci's book is really eye-opening. It's like he's giving us a secret decoder ring for the credit union world.
That's a great way to put it.
Bankruptcy is already a stressful process.
Absolutely.
But when you add in all these extra credit union factors, it can feel completely overwhelming.
Right. And that's where having the right guidance can make all the difference.
For sure, you need someone who understands the ins and outs of both bankruptcy and credit unions.
Exactly, someone who can help you navigate all the complexities and come up with a strategy that actually works for your situation.
And that's where a firm like Geraci Law comes in.
Absolutely. They have a whole team of experienced bankruptcy attorneys who've seen it all.
They've helped countless people just like our listeners who are facing these same challenges.
They know the law, they know the strategies, and they know how to get results.
And most importantly, they understand what you're going through emotionally.
Yeah.
It's not just about the legal stuff.
It's about having someone on your side who cares.
And the best part is they offer free consultations.
That's right.
So you could talk to an attorney, get personalized advice, and find out what your options are without any pressure or obligation.
It's all about empowering yourself with knowledge.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into credit unions and bankruptcy, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
You're not alone. Bankruptcy can feel like a very lonely experience, but there are resources available.
Absolutely.
There are people who care, and there is a path forward.
You just have to take that first step.
Exactly. So if you're struggling with debt and thinking about bankruptcy, don't be afraid to reach out for help. Do your research. Talk to a qualified attorney like the folks at Geraci Law.
They can help you get back on track.
There's a brighter future waiting on the other side. And with the right guidance, you can get there.
Well said. It's been great talking with you about this.
Same here. Until next time, everyone, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep striving for a better financial future for yourselves.